We have gathered here today for the inauguration of a book, High Hopes, written by Tony London. And I have tried to invite the people from Education Department, the Secretary, and also the Minister. But at the last minute, some of them have to change their schedule, some of them could not make it. So finally, the pleasant and joyful duty of releasing the book fall on me. I call it joyful and pleasant duty. And I am not going to spend a lot of time. I would simply like to inaugurate this book, release this book, and say just few words. One is how important education in general and education to the Tibetan children is very obvious and needs any explanation. And second, there are many who writes about Tibetan political issues and other short-term related culture and social activities. But there are not so many who plans and writes about Tibetan education and also long-term strategies. So in the case of this book, he had worked with teachers, discussing the problems they are facing. He gave talks and lectures, ran workshops, and met with the people who are in charge of Tibetan education and had several hours of discussion and so forth. So based on his first-hand experience, he has written this book, which also right in the beginning highlights also the education background that we have here, the Indian system of education, which is more or less a British legacy. So he touches on those points also. And he also talks about the education system in Australia, where he worked in a school for many, many years. He is expert in that area. And then the first-hand account of the Tibetan system of education, which is running right now, and the things that we are thinking about introducing or changing, and many ideas. So therefore, I'm sure that this book will be not only interesting, but very, very useful and far-reaching for our long-term education program. It is now found throughout the world that those countries, nations, where there is good education system of education in general, and particularly good culture, those countries, wherever they go, either as businessmen or as refugees, wherever they go, normally they come with a very good success story. Whereas those people who don't have that depth of culture and education, they normally have to struggle a lot. So therefore, as His Holiness has always been saying, that education is extremely, extremely important in general, and especially in terms of not only our human, leading our good human life, but also in terms of our struggle. If it is to be non-violent, then non-violent struggle can be made by a person or by persons who have in-depth knowledge of what non-violence is about. It's not just sitting there and not doing any violence, things like it's really, really rooted in a deep philosophy which is related to the long-lasting well-being and happiness of not only human beings but also sentient beings. So all this is very much dependent on a proper system of education. And just before coming down here, I was meeting a businessman who had written a very interesting book about how to stop recession in today's world. So there also he was saying that as a businessman, he was able to see clearly that unless we are able to inculcate a way of life and way of thinking which is true to the reality, we are not going to succeed in anything. There may be short-term rises or success, but it will very soon lead to recession or fall. So therefore, in harmony with the Buddhist teaching, if we are able to live a life where all activities, economical activities, business activities, any other professional activities, so long as you link it to the human life and consider it as a human activity, then whatever you do, even if you do mathematical calculation, it will be useful. But if you dealing it, nowadays they use the word derangement, which will gradually lead to derailing the whole system, you see. So therefore, those kind of systems, whatever it is, bound to fail and not to succeed. So therefore, I deeply appreciate the hard work that you did and spending so much time and with the Tibetan people and with dedication, and especially for the library also. It's a great pleasure that you made us publish this book and also release it from here. It's a great privilege for us to be able to release this book and launch this book. And the publication of this book is also done by himself in the sense that he bore all the costs. Okay, so that is also a big relief, because normally library doesn't have enough resource to do many good things that we want to do. But so this is the book that you're going to see.
Thank you. Yes.
You sit down there.
So thank you very much for inviting me here and for being here. And I would like to begin by just thanking, in the book I have thanked many people, but I would just like to thank everyone who's here and everyone who's helped me along the way, because people have made themselves very accessible. They've been very honest and open, and I have said to them at the time when I have talked to them that I would want them to be frank, and I would want them to feel free, that they could share their words with me. And so we have done that, and that is the process we've gone through. When I was a student teacher many, many years ago, like more than 50 years ago, one of the things that we were required to do in our final year was to visit a variety of schools to get an understanding of what education was like in a broader sense, because we had a fairly narrow, I would say, form of education. So we went to the blind school, the deaf school, this school, that school, a whole range of schools, and one of them was the Jewish school. And the rabbi who was in charge of the school gave a talk, and one of the things he said, the Jews have had a very hard time and have been moved over the centuries from one country to another. And he said the one thing that we have always valued that we could take with us, because they had many artefacts and things they could not always take, was their education. He said that was the thing that we valued most highly. Now, as it happened, in Melbourne at the time where I was a student, the Mount Scopus College, the Jewish college, was providing half of the medical graduates from one school. So that was a sort of impetus that was being given in that particular area. So my relationship with the Tibetan situation began about 12 years ago. I was doing some work, as requested by some people, with some bonded labourers being put in a school in South India and being given a fast-track education to enable them to where they'd missed many years of schooling, to be allowed and able to go into a school with 1 year's special training. And the people who were running this were a group of Swiss nuns, Order of the Holy Cross, in Bangalore, and they were wondering how they were achieving this, because they were all health workers and were not sure what the situation was, whether they were being successful. And they asked me if I would go, and so I worked in that school and wrote a report and so on. And whilst I was here, I met some Tibetans, and they said to me, would you be prepared to come and do some work for us? Well, the work was to do some work with the Soundway. Some of you may have heard of it. It's a phonetics program that we use in the Sambota schools. And they asked me if they would just do one small group. So I came up to the last centre in the middle of winter, staying in a freezing hotel, didn't bring enough clothes with me, and I worked with 3 monks and the owner of the Om Hotel, who was interested to find out what this new education would be like for his daughter. Tashi Namgyal from Spiti was one of the three monks. And the enthusiasm and the interest in the education process that came from those monks and from the owner of the hotel inspired me to come back. And so I've been coming back now for 11 years. And I started coming on working through Karmageluk Yuthok as the Education Secretary at the time, working with Sambota schools, and I've worked many years with Karma Chundak. But over time I've met many other school teachers and principals and children from a wide range of Tibetan schools. And the more time I spent with the Tibetans, the more inspired I became in what an amazing achievement it was that people who had left Tibet, mostly without any formal education, unless they were a monk or a nun, they had a few bureaucrats had their children educated, but not many, to come into India and to start from scratch. There aren't many instances in the modern history where a community has started from scratch, having had no history of formal education for the bulk of the populace. And so that was where I started becoming more and more interested in making notes, meeting people, and the idea of a book grew. And once the idea of the book grew, I was committed to writing. So I wrote a bit and wrote a bit. And then I came and saw Lakdor and said what I was doing, and he said that it sounded like a good project for LTWA, and so we agreed to go ahead with the book. And I was not going to go ahead with the book unless it was going to be accepted by Lakdor in its own right. And once it was accepted and so on, then my wife and I agreed that we would then agree to fund it. I didn't want it ever to appear to be a self-publication situation. And so the book has grown, and I've had many people help me read parts of it as it's been developed. And the basic purpose of the book has two purposes. One is to describe for the Tibetans and for future Tibetans where the Tibetans have come from and how their education system has grown and developed and matured and what challenges there are. And the second is for the outside world to find out more about the Tibetan situation. And so really, in many respects, the book is the Tibetan story, because it begins in the early chapters with what was Tibet like before the rest of the world started trying to come into Tibet, right through the Dalai Lama leaving with his retinue and all the people who followed, to the development of CST schools, and then gradually through Samdong Rinpoche, the development of the basic education policy. So it takes all of that in, focuses very strongly on the basic education policy, because that is now the major achievement of what has happened, apart from the schools and so on. A core to help develop authentic people has been developed. Interestingly, when I had the chapters checked through by Samdong Rinpoche, I had to do this, of course, being an Occidental, not being not being a Tibetan. I had to make sure that I had things correct, and so various people read various chapters. And when Samdong Rinpoche read the chapters in which he was involved, having developed the precursor and then eventually the basic education policy in the form that it is now, he said to me, "This is a very interesting experience for me." He said, "I was so deeply involved in what we were doing that it has taken an outsider to come along and point out to me how much we achieved in such a short time." And so that was his response. He didn't find any faults in what I'd written or historically or anything like that. He was more interested in the way someone had come into the situation and described it as an outsider. And the insiders often don't realise what's happening because they're so deeply involved in day-to-day activities. To get an oversight is sometimes quite difficult. And the book also goes to in the last two chapters, it talks about the diaspora, the current diaspora, the three generations of Tibetans and how they're dealing, the old people coming in, the people who've been living here, and then their children who are now being in the schools, and of course it'll be soon the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren. It describes those challenges, and it also clearly puts the Tibetan situation in the Chinese-Tibetan context. So it doesn't move away from that. It in fact faces up to it, raises some issues that have been raised. It falls short at one point in that it's a big challenge that's just being taken on by the Tibetan Education Department, and that is to take on the CST schools, the Tibetan schools for that were set up by Nehru and His Holiness, because they are quite a different culture of school from the schools that already exist from the DOE, and so that is going to be a new challenge, for a very big challenge, because there's a different culture. So there are obviously subsets. The book also has in it six case studies where I just looked at individual schools which are quite different from each other, so the outsider can look at this and say, oh right, they are quite different, there are big challenges. What are the challenges? Well, they're in the book, some of them. There's one which links to the ideas of Gyaltsen, where he is asking questions about, he wrote an article for Tibet Review, and he talked about what he thought what the challenges were, and he put it down to one which I agree with, because it's where I've been working most of the time, and that is the basic education policy. I think is a beautiful document, and I'm an ambassador for it outside of this area, back in my own country, and that's why I'm hoping the book will be well regarded there, and we'll market it as much as we can, given that Tibet is a relatively small audience, Tibet information and ideas in the West, although the Dalai Lama does a lot to help that, enliven that. But the idea is the challenge is really not so much the basic education policy is there, but it is how it is effectively carried out through the school, through the classrooms. So a lot of my time has been on effective classrooms. I spend a lot of time with teachers trying to help them get more effective in their classrooms so that students benefit most. And just recently, for example, there has been a professional development document developed for Tibetan schools. And my aim is to try and enliven that more and more and more, because it's improving the teachers' concept of themselves, their understanding of the classroom situation, and about them understanding more effectively student learning. That is the challenge, I think, the really big challenge, and it's a hard one, because many teachers have been taught in CST type schools. The Indian model came from the British Indian model has been adapted to some extent by the Tibetans, and it still lingers there, and it's something, it's almost habitual, very hard to change. But it is the change that is going to have to be made to make BEP become more effective. That is the core challenge. And the professional development booklet is certainly one of the next steps to take. But it's going to be a big challenge, and it's going to take quite a long time. I praised some teachers. I had a workshop down at Chantra TCV the other day, and I praised them because I think they are very, very committed. They work very hard. One of the things that we have to do as outsiders and insiders, of course, is to develop the expertise, the level of expertise, so the enthusiasm can be more accurately and more effectively directed. So they're the key things from the book. And it's been a real pleasure to write it. And I'm now going around doing a bit of marketing, because that's what writers do. But all of the profits, in fact, I think if we sell only 200 of these books in Australia, sell them, we're calling it a donation. So you make a donation and you get the book. I think we can cover the original cost of production from selling 200 books in Australia. So the cost differential in books is a helpful thing in this situation. So there we are. They're my main comments, and I'm open to questions if there is a need for questions.
Yeah. Any questions?
Yes.
What is your view on the fact that the medium of school education among Tibetans in exile is English?
What is my view? I have a view that the Tibetans have to work this out for themselves. And I'm not trying to be a politician here. I've quite a few, just in the workshops that I've been working on in the last 2 weeks, that has come up as an issue. And it's something which there is no easy answer to. Linguists will say some linguists say immersion in their own language, success by class 4, they'll be successful in anything else. Other people think, no, we can't wait till year 4. We want them to learn as soon as possible. Now, there are anecdotal things which get you to ask questions. The inspectors were coming around, the board that comes around and it visits schools. They were visiting Petuan School, and they got there early, and the principal wasn't there, and so they were walking around the school and they were going to classrooms talking to students. And by the time it was Tenzin Dorje, and it's in the book, by the time Tenzin Dorje arrived, they'd already had a good chance to talk to the students. And they just said, we are so surprised. And he said, why is that? He said, your students in class 4 who have only been doing English in class 4 are superior to the children who've been doing English since class 1. That was their perception. And just unsolicited, they just went and had observed. So that would be an argument for saying, well, if the English is introduced at class 4 and it's taught very well, it doesn't matter. It's very vexed, and I can't say that I have a fixed opinion either way. That's my only answer. Obviously, people have to be as effective as they can on whichever method they use. I don't think it's hard and fast, because it depends on what family they come from, what they speak in the language they speak at home. It's really quite a multifaceted issue. And I know it's one that has to be resolved one way or another, or it may be simply be playing shuttlecock for a period of time.
Some parents say the quality of teaching in the Tibetan schools is coming down. Is this impression you talk about in the book?
Oh no, I don't say that, because my perspective is only 10 years, and it's a very interesting thing. But Samdol Rinpoche makes the point of what time frame do you judge things in? What time, especially with education, which is a slow release thing. He says his time frame is 700 years, and he said after 10 years, when the BEP was being examined, that's quite a narrow length of time for such a big cultural change. Gyaltsen talks about goes right back to the British Empire. So it's very hard to be very precise. I know that all of the Tibetan schools are struggling to keep up the really good teacher quality when there is a leakage going on. The leakage thing is something which is hard to work with. And I can't say more than that. Well, thank you for your question.
Some questions from the younger generation.
I did a workshop up here with class 4 and 5 teachers up in the centre here. It'd be 5-6 years ago, and I got to know them really well. We were together for nearly 10 days, and at the very end, we're just having a loose, quiet session at the very end, and I just threw in collective nouns. We developed the first year 4-5 syllabus based on the basic education policy. It was the first time a group of teachers had worked together and say, right, BEP is the core, how will we do it? And I worked with them, facilitated. So I threw in, what's a collective noun for crows? And straight away, one of the staff said, a murder. And that, of course, is correct. A murder of crows is the collective noun. How many knew that? How many of you knew that? A murder of crows is the collective noun for a group of crows. So then I said, because I'd been working really hard at developing their oral skills and their confidence, then I said to them, and they knew I was working with them really hard, I said, what's a collective noun for a group of Tibetan teachers? Well, of course, they sat in silence. And I said, that's it, a silence of teachers. That reluctance to come forward and say things. I don't know if it's cultural, I'm not sure, but that's quite a hard thing to work with for the teachers. It's really one of the issues of that classroom thing, getting them to be confident and all of those things. Yeah.
They believe in silence speaks louder than...
And often it does.
My next question is not related to your book, but it comes out of personal curiosity. I went through the invitation and discovered you were born in Scotland.
Oh, yes.
But you are born in London. I thought London was in England.
My father was a Yorkshireman, so he was English. Yes.
I was actually thinking more about the wave that hit education, say in Australia in the 1970s. And obviously India is overdue for such a wave. Many countries can't have access to the resources, of course, like Burma, Nepal and so forth. But the Tibetan system is sitting in this beautiful place, but losing a lot of their good educators. And there are unemployed graduates. I was wondering if there was some way, without disturbing all the good that has been built at all, to really enhance this. It's like once you change your teaching techniques, things become a lot easier and a lot more exciting, a lot more fun, and at the same time can hold the quality.
I agree with that. It's hard to balance that. I mean, I agree with that. But the context is the issue, that these are economic realities. It's sort of the bigger picture of the fact that some school numbers are dropping, that we don't have people coming in from Tibet anymore, so that the numbers in some schools are dropping, and then and it's a difficult thing for the Tibetans, for you. There's movement between the schools because some schools are regarded as more superior than others. And so in that context, it's really very hard to see it as a stable thing from which you can just simply say, add this or do that, because it's changing so quickly. And I think the leakage thing is just related to the fact that just the other day, a friend of ours, we got to know this young physiotherapist, and we were looking forward to meeting him, and we came back this time. 2 years later, he has gone to France, has a partner and a baby, and he's a physiotherapist in France. That is a natural... People do these things. And so it's very hard to know what it is that's attracting them away, and whether or not we can do that through the schools is hard to know. There have been some very interesting questions.
Just to thank you, I have a small book for you. This is already written, so you don't have to rewrite this one. But I also have a book for you. Please come. This is 100 customs on traditions of Tibetan people, which means you together have to write 100 books.